A hero born without a family.
Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Lost Kushida and Minato Married Someone Else movie. Before we start, please go support Dolly Delia 18 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistake in character's gender, but of course Naruto is a male. What would have happened if someone other than Madara had interrupted the sealing of Naruto and another small baby? What if there was someone else besides Naruto? What if the third Hokage had arrived late and didn't see the sealing? What if Kushina Uzumaki died that night, Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage, better known as the Yellow Flash of Konoha? But what if Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto died at that very moment? Many questions and many secrets. If you want to find out, I invite you to read this story full of secrets and lies. Discover the true secret of Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, better known as Uzumaki Natsu. Prologue: the day it all begins. They were in a room where there was a redhead lying on a bed and next to her was the fourth Hokage. Oh, it hurts so much. Kushina screamed with all her might in the face of the unbearable pain. Please, Kushina, push a little more, Biwako said, looking Kushina in the eyes. Are you sure she's okay? Minato asked, his voice filled with worry and panic. Of course she's fine, she's a strong woman, a man would have fainted from such pain. The midwife paused to look Minato directly in the eyes. Please, Minato, you're the fourth Hokage, act like it, Biwako said, slightly irritated. Oh, I think the baby's coming, Biwako said, looking at the baby's head. I can't take it anymore, Databane. Kushina said, clearly in pain. No, keep pushing or we'll lose the baby. Biwako said, Kushina, my love, please push harder. The Kyuubi is trying to break free and I don't think I can hold on any longer, Minato said, trying to put more chakra into the seal. Okay, let's try one more time. Kushina shouted, putting all her remaining strength into it. Just a little more, said Biwako, trying to get the baby out. Kushina screamed with all her might, only to be interrupted by the baby's crying. You did it, Kushina, you did it, said a cheerful Minato. Just then, Kushina's scream echoed through the room, causing everyone to stare in bewilderment. Biwako handed the baby to one of her assistants while she watched in confusion. Why didn't you tell me you were expecting another baby? Biwako complained, a little annoyed. What are you talking about? Minato asked, bewildered and surprised, just like Kushina, since it was assumed that only one was going to be born. Biwako ignored the question, not because she didn't want to answer, but because she couldn't. Hey, Kushina screamed in pain. Biwako positioned herself again between Kushina's legs, and Minato also concentrated more, sending energy to the seal. Puja. Biwako shouted while looking at the head a little. She screamed again in pain. I can't take it anymore, Kuhina said, exhausted. If you want this baby to be born and live, you have to push or it will die, Biwako shouted. Kushina nodded, beads of sweat trickling down her face. She took a deep breath before pushing with all her might, fearing for the life of her other baby. Almost there, just a little more, she said as Biwako grabbed the baby one more time. Push. She shouted louder. Kushina pushed again with all her strength until the baby's cry echoed throughout the room. It's a girl, Biwako said happily. Can I see them? Minato asked in a pleading tone. No, their mother needs to see them first, Biwako said, leaving Minato disappointed. My babies, hello, my name is Kushina, I am your mother. I promise to treat you well, take care of you and protect you, said Muzu before the midwife took them to get them dressed. Minato, Kushina, what will the children's names be? Biwako asked, filling out the registration forms. Well, we didn't know our little baby was going to be born, but I think I have a perfect name for her. My youngest daughter will be called Natsumi Namikaze Uzumaki. The girl had blonde hair with red tips, light blue eyes, and 3 lines on her cheeks like a cat's. My eldest son will be called Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto. The boy had sunblonde hair and blue eyes, and he also had 3 marks on his cheeks like a cat's. Excellent, I'll take them to the other room to prepare them, Biwako said, taking the babies and leaving through the door on the right, but her path was blocked by a hooded man wearing an orange mask. Who are you? Biwako asked irritably. Her downfall. Having said this, the masked man tried to stab the midwife with a kunai, but it was not possible because the nurse in charge pushed her, receiving the cut in her neck and sending Biwako hitting the wall, dying instantly. I only need one, said the masked man, taking Naruto. Who are you? The fourth Hokage asked, fearing for the life of his heir. Yondaime, step away from the Jinchuriki or your son will die, Minato said, pushing Kushina back a little. Minato didn't know what to do, as he didn't want to separate from his wife, but he wanted to get his son back. Seeing that Minato was determined, the masked man decided to take other measures. As you wish, said the masked man calmly, tossing Naruto into the air only to be caught by Minato. However, Minato hadn't counted on the blanket covering the baby having explosive tags, so he quickly removed them to successfully save his son. Now you'll pay for this, said the fourth Hokage, only to see his wife disappear along with the masked man. So the next thing he did was leave little Naruto in a crib with his sister. The fourth Hokage appeared in a yellow flash along with Kushina, picked her up and laid her down next to the babies. "Thank you, Minato," said Kushina as she hugged the babies. The fourth Hokage stared at him sadly, opened a small wardrobe, took out his Hokage cloak and put it on. "I will return," Minato said before disappearing in a yellow flash. "Don't worry, I'll take care of you and protect you, Databane," Kushina said with a smile. "I love you both so much, you look so much like your father," she said breathlessly. "I'm so sorry about all this is unfair to you. I'm so happy that you're safe," she said as small tears escaped her eyes. "I love you so much," she said as she hugged them. The place changed, then the Konoha forest was seen, which appeared along with the nine-tailed demon fox, but what caught his attention was that it had chains tied all over it. Kushina was panting on the ground, chakra chains protruding from her back. "Minato, there's no time. Seal it inside me so it doesn't cause any more problems," Kushina said, sounding slightly tired. "No, if I do that you'll die and the seal will be useless. I'll seal it in Naruto and Natsumi so they can control their power, and for that I'll use the Reaper Death Seal." Minato paused, only to be interrupted by Kushina. "Because using that jutsu has already changed your life, and why does it have to happen to our children? It's such a heavy burden." Kushina cried through her tears. "I know, but I have no choice. Please forgive me," Minato said, quickly forming the hand seals. "Shiki Fuin," Minato said, summoning the Shinigami. "Human, why have you summoned me?" asked the god of death. "Shinigami-sama, please seal the soul, the consciousness of the Kurama, and half of the yang power in my eldest son, Naruto, and seal the other half, the yin power in my youngest daughter in exchange for my life," Minato said in a determined tone. "All right, that's how it will be done," said the Shinigami, preparing to make the seal. "If the only way to seal the fox is so, then so be it," Minato thought before nodding, causing the Shinigami to seal Naruto's soul, consciousness, and power, and Natsumi's other part of the power. They saw how the Shinami was about to extract the Kyuubi, but the chains came loose and it unleashed its claw towards Naruto and Natsumi. "I won't let them seal me again," thought the Kyuubi. The claw was so close, but Minato and Kushina intervened, causing it to pass right through them and leaving Natsumi and Naruto just centimeters away. "My little princess, mommy loves you very much too," she said with tears in her eyes. "Even though I didn't know you were going to come into this world, I was filled with joy when they told me you were going to be born. I wish I could be with you, watch you grow up. I would have loved to see your first date and hear your first words, but even though I'm not by your side, I'll always be in your heart. I know your brother will protect you and love you very much. I love you both," she said, looking at Minato. "I'm sorry I'm the only one who can speak. It doesn't matter, children, my words are the same as your mother's. I know you two will protect each other, I love you." This time, without any interruption, they managed to seal the fox inside their children. Both fell dead immediately next to the hard, cold ground. The babies were surrounded by a bright red chakra. At that moment, a man with bandages over one eye and half his body appeared, along with two other individuals wearing black masks and cloaks. "Take those babies to the facilities," he ordered in a stern voice. "But Danza-sama, they are the children of the fourth Hokage," he said in a private voice, afraid of kidnapping his children. "I don't care, I didn't ask for your opinion," he shouted, annoyed that someone had disobeyed him. To which he nodded as he moved forward to pick up one of the babies, which in this case was Naruto since the other individual was carrying Natsumi. They watched in surprise as the chakra disappeared when they were separated, and Natsumi began to cry. "Finally, I have the fourth Hokage's children in my hands, and even more so now that they are the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki," he said with a malicious smile. "With him Sandame." Unfortunately, Hiruzen was delayed, as he encountered civilians on the way who needed medical attention. Things weren't good at all. He was very worried because the fourth Hokage had suddenly left with the Nine-Tails, and he began to wonder if they were all right. He quickly signaled for some ninjas to come closer. The third Hokage was traveling quickly until he reached the place where he saw Kushina and Minato dead. This left the third Hokage very sad and in shock, but not only him but also the other two people who were with him. After that event, more people came, among them the shinobi of the generation where Kakashi and his companions were. They were perplexed and even incredulous, unable to accept the death of the fourth Hokage. Among the newcomers, the most affected was Kakashi, who looked on with profound sadness, helplessness, and anger at not having been able to do anything to save Minato. Kakashi approached the lifeless body of the fourth homie. "Sensei," he whispered, dropping to his knees. By then, tears were already streaming down his face as he mourned his teacher's death. He recalled the moments when he first met him, their conversations, their training sessions, the time he spent with Abido and Rin, the most difficult times, practically everything. "Until I hear the third Hokage speak. Listen, I know the fourth Hokage's death was a high price he had to pay to defeat the Nine-Tails, but let's make sure his and Kushina's sacrifice wasn't in vain," he said, his voice firm yet broken, as the civilians and ninjas gathered around to hear him. "Perhaps very few of you knew that the fourth Hokage's child was to be born today," he said, surprising some while leaving others unaware. "What you didn't know is that Kushina's child's birth carried a great risk, possibly resulting in the Nine-Tails," he added. Some began to blame the baby, but the third Hokage continued. However, the fourth Hokage was prepared to prevent that, which means the baby wasn't to blame. Hiruzen continued, causing some to regret what they had said. Now the only thing we can do so the fourth Hokage can rest in peace, it's peaceful finding the son of the fourth. He finished speaking, to which everyone nodded, while civilians and ninjas began searching for the son of the fourth. They searched everywhere but never found a trace of that baby. Tracking dogs and people specialized in tracking joined together, until they saw a blue blanket lying on the floor. They notified the Hokage, who along with the others followed the dog, which was where they found the trail of the blanket until they arrived at a kind of bed. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's where Naruto and Natsumi were. The strange thing is that there was nothing there, and the problem is that the scent only reaches that far. I don't understand how far the trail goes, replied Sumin Yuzuka, a Jonin rank Konoichi from Kano Hagakure. She is a member of the Inuzuka clan. Like the rest of her clan, she has a Ninken partner named Kuramaru. What's also most disconcerting is that there was blood in that place, where the baby was supposed to be. That gave everyone a chill. Do you believe the baby died in the Kyubai's attack? Asked Choza Akimichi, a Jonin from the Akimichi clan. No one responded because they found it truly sad, but for them the answer was very obvious but painful. The Hokage was deeply saddened. Not only had Minato died, but also his wife and young son. After a while they left, but not before observing a moment of silence out of respect for the family who had just passed away. They took Kushina and Minato's bodies away. That same night, a memorial service was held for the heroes of Konoha and for their young son. Their bodies were buried side by side. The headstone read, "For the heroes of Konoha who sacrificed their lives to save the entire village, love, friends, family, comrades, and their son." Synopsis: will they be here for the rest of their lives? In the village of Konoha, hidden among the leaves, dawn had barely broken. Everyone was leaving their homes to begin another day of the same routine. All in that place was happiness, but the same could not be said of a place a little way from the village. Better known as the Anbu compound, that place is hidden beneath the compound building. The high-ranking Anbu don't know about it, not even Sarutobi Hiruzen, the current Hokage of Kanakakure. Not a single ray of sunlight reaches that place. The walls are moldy dark brown, though they appear black. The corridors are like deadened labyrinths. You can't tell if you're walking left or right. You could easily get lost. This is because the walls are imbued with powerful genjutsu, enough to trouble even a seasoned ninja. There are tiny rooms barely big enough for one person, with bars instead of doors like in a prison. This place is protected. It is Bayugan and Sharigan proof, so if someone tries to see through the facility, they would only see a completely empty place, as if that place had never been excavated, all thanks to a prototype that had covered the entire facility. It also had seals of silence, which is why no one noticed the screams and cries of the children who were slowly dying. It was horrible when you screamed and no one heard you, when you begged until your throat was dry and they left you to suffer in silent agony. Everyone was happy, ignoring what was happening in that place. Being in a cell was freezing cold all the time, so much so that it felt like it was snowing, and all of this was done on purpose to test who was strong. According to their kidnappers, it was a survival test. Not many made it. This was made abundantly clear when 5 children were found dead each week, some from blood loss and others more likely from hypothermia. Very few children survived. Some had great resilience, others possessed a large amount of chakra, others had their elemental abilities or their Kenkai instincts. Still others were simply accustomed to the harsh conditions. The latter was the case with a blonde boy who had been there for quite some time. He no longer felt the cold, even though his face, once shaded as if by the sun, was now pale. His lips were bloody and dry, and his face was covered in wounds from blows, jutsu, kunai, and shuriken, the icy cold tearing at his skin like razor blades. This was the condition of many of the children locked in the cells. The children came from different shinobi villages. Danzo had brought them here, and it's worth noting that they were brought against their will. He sent several Anbu to infiltrate different parts of the shinobi world. They were all special children, so to speak. They possessed unique abilities that set them apart from other towns or villages. They were monitored and tested, and then brought back unconscious, barely alive. But the same couldn't be said of the people who stood in their way, whether they were friends, parents, or acquaintances. This was the case of the blonde man who was kidnapped 5 years ago, so what the blonde man heard was when he was a baby just a few hours old. He knew perfectly well who his parents were. He had known for 2 years since he met Kyubai, that's what other people call him, but Kurama told him his real name. He had many emotions inside him, including happiness at knowing he had parents, anger at knowing that the same people who gave him life were the cause of his being there, sadness at knowing they were dead, and countless other emotions he couldn't explain, but honestly, how could he? Danzo was slowly killing each emotion within him to make him a perfect weapon. Now he was a 5-year-old boy with blonde hair like the sun, 3 marks on each cheek, a pale complexion, and deep blue eyes. He is Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, son of 2 great shinobi the world has ever known. But that son died on that sad night when his parents also died. That night he was left in charge of his beloved little sister. His mother died knowing that Naruto would protect his sister. She's the only person he keeps fighting for, the one he's never given up on, because no matter how many times he's been down, he always gets back up, no matter how bad his wounds are. He's like her guardian, always protecting her from anyone who wants to hurt her or has bad intentions toward his little girl. After all, he was only the older brother for a few minutes. That's his story. His life was almost literally changed by being brought here. They treat him like an animal. No, they treat him much better than an animal. The blonde man was inside a cage, leaning against the bars. His hands were imprisoned by black bracelets, specially designed to prevent him from using chakra. He also had them on his feet, his waist, and around his neck, where it was very difficult for him to breathe or swallow saliva. It was so tight that almost no blood was circulating to his brain, all of it held against a wall. And if that wasn't enough, he had seals all over his body. They were gravity and weight seals, but it was too much for his small body to bear, but that's not something his kidnappers care about. Everything here was horrible, and the worst part is that no one knows this place exists, least of all the children. But will they ever be able to escape, to live in peace and happiness, or will they be here for the rest of their lives? Chapter 1, I'm used to a different kind of pain. The pain was getting worse and worse. Every wound, every lash, every scratch, every blow was becoming more and more unbearable, more agonizing. Sometimes I wonder if I live only to suffer. Why did life bring me here for this purpose, or is it for another purpose? Why am I still alive? Why live a life of pain? Is it a punishment? What did I do wrong? Did I make a mistake, or am I a mistake? I always ask myself questions every day of my life. I've asked myself things but without ever arriving at an answer. It's so hard to ask to be happy. For once in my life, I wish I could be happy for a whole day, that my heart could be filled with what they call happiness. I don't know what it means, but I wish I had it. I don't know the exact word, but my cellmates always mention it, and another word to him. What was it again? Free as a bird. I think that's what they said, but what is bird? What is freedom? All I know is what they teach me through beatings, because I knew it was a hit when I got hit. I learned the word suffer because they told me, suffer demon, and that's what I did. I suffered because it hurt. I knew it was pain because the blows hurt, but why did my heart hurt too? I don't know the answer to that. But why does it still hurt if I don't know? Because I look for a wound or a cut or something, but I can't find anything. My cellmates know more than I do about what's out there. They say there's light, salt, and fresh water, a shining sun, a moon and a crescent moon, grass. They say there are many things and describe them to me, but I never understand. I always imagine it. But how can you imagine something if you never see it? What they kept asking me was, are you immortal? I didn't understand why they asked me that. For starters, I don't know what immortality is, and if it is, why do they think I am? How do you manage not to feel pain? Well, I didn't understand that either. How can you not feel something that leaves a mark? But I answered anyway, because I'm used to a different kind of pain. What? He frowned and didn't understand, so he asked, a different kind of pain? I don't understand. I had answered, well, it's because the first time they opened a wound on my skin it hurt, but you get so used to feeling that same pain that when they do it again it doesn't hurt anymore. When I answered him, he just stood there thinking and looked at me sadly with another look I couldn't understand, so I asked Kurama and he said, with pity. When Kurama said that, he also looked at me with pity. I didn't understand that either, but I didn't ask him. But now I know one more word, and I did it without feeling any pain. That was a huge breakthrough. The only person I can talk all this about is Kurama, since I don't want to worry my younger sister. I know she has a lot of problems, we all do, so it seems unfair to add to them. Besides, Kurama gives me advice and helps me a lot with everything I need. Sometimes when I'm scared or don't want to feel pain anymore, I go numb or move when they're hitting me, so I know I'm not alone because Kurama understands my pain, the pain of being locked up. From what Kurama tells me, I know he's been locked up for a long time, and I've been locked up practically since I've been old enough to remember. Remembering the bad things is common here, sadly, that's how it is. I have more bad memories than good, and I treasure those few good moments more than ever because I know they'll never happen again. Life is very short. Here, if you die, they simply replace you. They put people in the place where you were. Every day I saw children die in front of me, watching with such helplessness and not being able to do anything. But I know those children go to a better place, a place where it's not cold, where you don't have to suffer pain or the fear of thinking, will they hit me today, and if not today, then when? Living in uncertainty, in constant worry would be so much better. Only then would life be worth living. The only thing they haven't taken from me are my dreams. After all, dreaming costs nothing. I love to sleep because you're not aware of anything around you. You don't have to hear the Anbu shouting and cursing, nor hear the last heartbeat of a child, nor constantly suffer such agonizing pain firsthand. Because I know my dreams are lifting me up, and for a few minutes I know I can be somewhere else. Unfortunately, those times are not now. Author narrates, he is so used to mistreatment that he sees it as normal. The routine is simple. In the morning, training and beatings, followed by chakra draining, psychological torture, and then physical torture. In the afternoons, the punishment for screaming during the torture, even just wincing in pain, is beatings. If he screams again, he'll be beaten until he's unconscious. At night, he receives 30 lashes, doubling the number each time he screams. That's why it's better to remain unconscious halfway through, moving around so he doesn't feel as much pain when he's hit on the head. And this cycle repeats itself every day. The people who withstood the mental torture jutsu did so because they had a strong mind that was quite difficult to subdue. Naruto had chains around his wrists, attached to the ends of the wall as well as around his feet. Chains around his ankles were fastened to the floor. Blood trickled from his hands because every time he was whipped, he gripped the chains tightly to stifle his screams, knowing they would amplify them if they heard him. At least now he wasn't holding on, he simply let his hands hang limp as the pain pierced him and his entire back went numb. Well, that's what happened during the first 7 lashes. After that, he simply got used to the whip as it slammed into his back, digging in for a few seconds before sliding out again, repeating the pattern. He was whipped from the age of 3. It was very difficult and he always kicked, screamed, and cried, but as the other 2 years passed, it hurt less and less. Naruto would be a big liar if he said it didn't hurt. Of course it hurt, but now the pain was bearable. All he felt was a great numbness throughout his body. After a while, once his torture had finished taking his revenge, the man finally grew tired of the blonde boy no longer responding to his blows. No matter how hard he squeezed the whip, he couldn't hear any screams or grimaces. This was simply no longer entertaining for him, so he stopped and untied the chains on his arms and ankles, causing Naruto to fall to the ground with a thud. The torturer grabbed the blonde man by his shirt and began dragging him through the corridors, passing by the rooms, leaving only a trail of blood in his wake. The trail stopped when he reached the blonde man's cell and, without saying a word, threw him inside. His back hitting the hard floor, the blonde man turned around and crawled to the edge of the cell, not letting the dim light in the room illuminate him, since he had long ago developed a very big problem in his eyes where he cannot see a ray of light because his eyes feel as if they were on fire. He doesn't remember the word for the disease he has very well. He leaned back against the wall. Naruto's body was covered in visible wounds. Blood streamed from his nose, his lip was swollen and split, and his eyebrow was so swollen it covered his left eye. He had a deep cut on his cheek and his arms were bruised, covered in scratches and cuts of varying sizes, some more serious than others. His stomach bore a huge gash that was bleeding profusely, and his legs were covered in bruises ranging from green to purple. His clothes were torn to shreds, but what was most disturbing was that his back was covered in cuts running in different directions, marks of whippings. They went too far this time. I have so many wounds that it's even hard to breathe, but I'm practically used to being beaten every day. I practically know my routine by heart, but that's normal now. For the little blonde boy, that was normal, like a constantly repeating routine. Others would think or even shout, how the hell can that be normal? But unfortunately, Naruto saw his life with a different ideology. This time it's very painful, but I just have to breathe deeply until the pain passes and try to cover the wounds. Naruto pulled bandages from his torn pants and wrapped them around his arms, legs, and stomach. Even with Kurama's chakra, he couldn't heal himself as he used to. He also couldn't keep his chakra being drained, and the blows he received were nothing new. He was used to it. It sounded sad, but this was his reality, his destiny. Kurama placed seals on him to make it seem like he didn't have as much chakra. Furthermore, he can regenerate his energy. It takes a while to fully recover, a maximum of 3 weeks. But that's not what worries him. What worries him is that Natsumi hasn't had any chakra taken from her yet because she doesn't have any. Her energy isn't very high, but that's because her chakra concentration is very slow. For Naruto, this is a good thing, not out of selfishness, but because if Danzo takes her chakra, it could be a great risk to her, even leading to death. She's not like Naruto, who can recover his chakra if it's stolen. That's what he's afraid of. For now, he has to wait. Besides, Danzo is extremely angry because he doesn't have another vessel to take chakra from. Natsumi is in the other corridor in a more decent cell. She's asleep because she couldn't sleep last night due to the screams from the torture. Natsumi kept screaming and begging them not to hurt her, but instead they tried to beat her too. Naruto wouldn't allow it. He can tolerate being hit, but what he won't allow is for them to touch a single hair on Natsumi's head. After all, he has to protect her and look after her well-being. Naruto would die if anything bad happened to Natsumi. Thinking about the possibility overwhelmed him and terrified him completely. Just imagining something happening to her truly frightened him. It was the only sanity he had left. If she hadn't been completely consumed by darkness, it was because of her. It was like having one foot near a cliff edge, but someone was holding you up to prevent it. But what if that person wasn't there anymore? You would simply fall off the cliff into the darkness. Unable to escape that darkness and be alone, she wouldn't allow anything to happen to Natsumi, her little sister. The blonde boy left those overwhelming thoughts behind. All he wanted to do was sleep, or rather, fall unconscious. That was the best option here. Naruto began to feel drowsier than ever, so he got into a more comfortable position to sleep more soundly. His eyes began to close on their own until he fell unconscious. Chapter 2. A Place Dreamed Of. The blonde man had been unconscious for 3 long days, but that's not something his kidnappers care about. In fact, they were waiting for the blonde man to wake up so they could return to their usual routine of making the blonde Jinchuriki suffer. In his subconscious. What they didn't know was that the blonde wasn't going to wake up because he was in the deepest recesses of his subconscious, a place that not even Kurama could enter since Naruto had created his own space like another corridor. This place was an empty white space where literally nothing exists and there is no one but Naruto. There he could hear nothing but the calming sound of water falling in drops, but the strangest thing is that there is no rain, no water, and no drops. It only sounds like this when it is night, and during the day you usually hear birds singing a beautiful melody, but there are no birds. Naruto is floating as if held by the wind, a wind that cannot be seen or felt, but you know it is there, you can feel it. The wind stirs his long blonde hair that reaches halfway down his back since he doesn't cut it because honestly, who would? The blonde boy lies with his eyes closed, unaware of anything or anyone. Because no one here would hurt him or yell at him, it's a perfect place to feel nothing, since that's what he feels when he's here absent from everything. The only drawback is that the longer he stays in this place, the harder it becomes for him to leave this room. No one can get him out of here, not even those trying to awaken his true body, nor even Kurama, because the further Naruto goes, the harder it is for Kurama to find him. Naruto cannot control anything that happens in this place. Moreover, the blonde boy did not create this place consciously but unconsciously since he doesn't even know that he created it. This place was created unconsciously because Naruto wanted a place where he would no longer suffer, a place far from those who wanted to hurt him, where no one could manipulate or control him. It was so much mental pain, mostly from the mental torture he endured where they filled his head with ideas and made him believe he was nothing, nobody. But what he truly was something, a weapon they could manipulate him. He couldn't speak to defend himself because he was a demon who didn't have the right to speak. He only deserved to be treated in the worst possible way because demons can't feel, therefore they can't suffer. Because of all this, Naruto unconsciously had to create everything, every place, a place, a dream. That's why the place is blank, because every time he's here, he imagines something he longs for with all his heart, something he unconsciously brings here. The sounds of water come from the sewer where Kurama is imprisoned. The water drips from the pipes, a sound that calms Naruto considerably as it's where his good friend is. The bird sound is because Naruto once asked a child who lives next to his cell what birdsong sounds like. The child imitated the sound of birds singing and Naruto was fascinated by the birdsong. He longed to see one sing and this memory was stored in his subconscious. When he was here he heard the bird, but since he didn't know what a bird looked like, he couldn't bring it back except for the sound. Hence the fact that Naruto cannot feel pain. The blonde man sat up again in a lotus position while the air held him in that position, still with his eyes closed. Naruto clasped his hands together, forming the M on his palm. A red chakra flowed from his palms, gathering all his thoughts and memories. Flashback. So what are birds like, Databeo? Naruto had asked. The birds, well, since it's difficult for you to imagine it when I describe it, I'd better draw it for you, he said with a smile, to which Naruto smiled fascinatedly and crawled a little since he was in pieces because they hadn't held him with the chains. The boy bit his thumb, making it bleed. He stuck his hand, the one with the blood, out of the cell bars and began to draw a cute bird on the floor. You're lucky I know how to draw, he said, finishing his drawing. I'm very good at drawing. And there was the bird he had longed to see. This is what they call a bird. I never imagined it like this, Databeo, said Naruto as he rested his head on his hands to get a better look. Yes, this is a bird. Look, she pointed to the end of the drawing. This is called a beak. When they eat, the beak opens, and that's also how they can communicate with other birds. That's how they produce the melody I taught you the other day, remember? She asked, to which the blonde boy nodded. And these are called wings. They use them to fly, to go from one place to another, moving from one end to the other. They are free in the sky. Free. Like what they said about being free as a bird, Databeo. He asked, remembering what they had said a few days ago. Yes, but don't take it so literally, it's just an expression, he said with a friendly smile, but seeing Naruto's frown of confusion, he began to explain. Look, it's said like that because imagine you're the bird and you're locked up, although that's not hard to imagine, he replied, pointing to the cages, to which the blonde nodded with a, oh really? Look, yeah, okay, I get it, how funny, he said sarcastically. Okay, where was I, he said, completely losing track of the conversation, at which point Naruto stopped laughing. You were left thinking I was that bird and that I'm locked up, Databeo, said Naruto. Oh yes, of course, I remember now well, so you're locked up. Therefore the expression free as a bird means that one day it will be possible for you to open the cage cell where you're locked up and get out of the four walls or a place where you can't get out. That you'll be free like a bird flying, going wherever you're. Wings legs can take you since you're flying and being wherever you want. I don't know if I explained myself well, he said, looking at Naruto. If I understand correctly, then you think we'll ever be free, Databeo? Naruto asked hopefully. The boy looked at him sadly. I don't know, Naruto, he replied with a grimace, but most likely not, he said, shaking his head. I highly doubt we'll ever be free. What? Naruto's hopes faded, but then he smiled when he remembered something Kurama had told him. You know what? A friend once told me that nothing is impossible if you set your mind to it, because I'm very sure that sooner or later I'll get out of here. I don't know if I'll be alive or dead, but I do know one thing: I'm going to do everything possible to get out. I'm not going to give up, Databeo, and if I don't give up, neither should you, he said with a smile. The boy looked at him in surprise, but then he smiled, and for the first time the boy was filled with hope. You're right, Naruto, he said, closing his eyes and smiling. A tear escaped his right eye as he thought about what the blonde boy had said. You know what? You remind me so much of my older brother. He never gave up. Rain or shine, he never gave up. He fought to the very end, even though he knew he couldn't win, even though he was always my role model. He opened his eyes, letting the tears flow freely down his face. You're right, no matter the consequences, we shouldn't give up. We have to keep going and try, right? He said with a smile, since he wasn't going to try or attempt anything. We have to get out of here, he said with determination. That's the spirit, Databeo, said the blonde man with a victorious smile. End of flashback. The red chakra began to take shape. Naruto began to mold it as if it were dough. He remembered the description and the drawing that his friend made, so it was very easy to make the bird correctly. It was absolutely amazing. Naruto held a scarlet bird in his hand, intricately detailed and incredibly beautiful. When it was ready, Naruto raised his hands and the chakra bird flew away and began to sing a melody. Naruto smiled upon hearing the singing. The blonde boy lay back down, outside the subconscious. Naruto woke up and opened his blue eyes. He was lying down, apparently in his cell, and he huffed because he hated being there. He tried to move, but it didn't work. His body wouldn't respond because of the obvious injuries and the weight and gravity seals. Since he wasn't in any condition to stand, he didn't have the energy to get up. He tried again but stopped when he heard footsteps in the hallway, so he settled back down and closed his eyes because he knew that if they saw him awake, they would start their routine of beating him again, and he didn't want them to do that. In his mind, he was already starting to think about the things they would do to him once he opened his eyes: the torture, the training, the beatings, and the draining of his chakra. I was very scared. She closed her eyes tightly and her mind began to torture itself by thinking and rethinking. He didn't want to be here suffering. He heard the footsteps one cell closer before reaching his. No, please, I don't want to be in this place. I want to go back to sleep. Go back to sleep. She screamed mentally. She desperately wanted to be gone. She wanted everything around her to disappear once again. She didn't want to feel anymore. All his thoughts were recorded in his subconscious. All his longing for what everything around him disappeared. In his subconscious. Everything was white. Naruto opened his eyes. He expected to wake up in the cell to be brutally beaten as usual, but instead he found himself in a place that was completely white. Where am I? Naruto wondered, his voice echoing in the place. Kurama, Naruto called. Kyorame, where are you? The blonde shouted, but all he heard was his own voice repeating itself over and over again. That and the sound of a bird. Naruto was confused. He turned towards the sound and saw something that fascinated him. It was a scarlet-colored bird. Wow, said Naruto, surprised. Then he laughed and a joyful laugh burst from his throat. Naruto chased after him, thinking he was just dreaming. Naruto ran laughing, unaware that his feet were not touching the ground. He was running in the air as if the air itself was holding him up. Naruto wanted to run faster so he could catch it. Unconsciously, his feet lifted as his hands stretched out and he managed to catch the chakra bird. Yes, Dattba, I got you. Naruto shouted, leaping into the air. As he did, the bird escaped his grasp. Come back here, Dattba. He yelled even louder. He laughed and flew away, making the air around him swirl. After all, here he feels no pain, here he suffers no fear, and here he has no uncertainty of knowing when they want to hit him. Here they have what was taken from him, the innocence that every child should have, and also freedom, free as a bird. Because now he is in a dreamlike place. Chapter 3 is wanting to die cowardly, in the subconscious. Kurama was truly worried because the blonde Jinchuriki had not awakened and he could not go to where he was due to the seal, which is why he was not allowed to go out and look for him. Kurama didn't know exactly how Naruto managed to make another room. He had a very vague idea but no answer. His theory is that it's due to the mental damage they caused him when they used the mental torture jutsu on him. They subjected him to a situation where his brain obstructed a large part of his dreams because he didn't want to be there in that place. That's one theory. The other possibility is that, as a Jinchuriki, his mind has greater capacity since a normal human cannot enter their subconscious, but Naruto can thanks to his condition as a Jinchuriki. So he created that place out of so much sadness. It was like a way to escape his terrible reality. And the other theory simply combines both theories, but everything leads to one conclusion. Naruto is unaware that he created a perfect place to no longer suffer, and the more mental damage he has, the harder it will be to escape that perfect dream. Kurama was truly worried, but he couldn't deny that this was all too contradictory. On one hand, he knew that Naruto, for once in his life, was no longer suffering the cruelty of the other humans who brutally hurt a little 5-year-old boy. Who could be so cruel as to do that to a child? The blonde boy, for once, was no longer suffering, but that was also too dangerous. Once he was there, he wouldn't want to leave, nor would he even try. On the other hand, he didn't want him to wake up and return to the routine he was already used to. Hell, he even thinks it's normal. He thinks it's nothing out of the ordinary to be whipped until he practically gets used to feeling that same pain every day of his miserable life. Before he was 3, he couldn't care less if anything happened to Naruto. He even mocked him for his miserable life. Now, looking back, he feels truly pathetic and ashamed of himself for thinking that way. But as time passed, he saw how they treated him, how he would just cower in a corner when they turned on the light, trying to make himself an easy target for their prey, how they would beat him. He tried to defend himself, but it was useless. Soon, as the months went by, he realized that escaping was pointless, and he simply got used to being beaten every afternoon during training. He would just curl up in a ball on the ground when they hit his stomach and stay there. Kurama knew that Naruto was really hurting from the blows, but instead of crying and screaming like any normal child, he just stared at a fixed point on the wall while being hit on his back. But the look that Naruto had in his eyes surprised him. He expected a look of hatred, however. Naruto gave him a much worse look. An emptiness, that's what he saw in his eyes, as if he didn't care in the slightest that he was being beaten. He also saw the coldness, a look that was not for a child, cold at heart. That was undoubtedly something that adults would tell him if he were up above and not underground. And what baffled him was that the boy didn't hate anyone. He doesn't hate the people who hit him. They are torturing him. They whip him, to his parents, to Danzo, not even Kurama, who was the cause of the beating. He simply didn't understand that child, and he understood even less of this world. Kurama sighed in frustration. He was going to leave it in Naruto's hands since he couldn't make a decision or carry it out, because whatever he decided, he wasn't going to do it anyway while in this place. But what he did hope was that in the place where he was, he wouldn't feel pain like in the real world, outside the subconscious. In the real world, Naruto's body lay on a stretcher in barely decent condition. His wounds were bandaged, not completely as a medical professional would do, but it was decent. He needed a blood transfusion. They simply used the children to donate the blood they needed for Naruto's surgery. His skin was paler than usual, with enormous dark circles under his eyes for a child his age, and his lips were white and dry. He had an ultravenous catheter in his hand and another one to monitor his heart. It wasn't that they took pity on the poor child or regretted what they had done, nor was it due to their generosity, but rather because the child had been in a coma for over 4 months. At first, they thought the child was faking it to avoid being beaten. However, as the weeks passed, they realized they were wrong, and Danzo, during an inspection, eventually found out. He was extremely furious that his chakra container wasn't in optimal condition, so they quickly attended to the child. But since no one was experienced enough to care for him, they couldn't do more than they already had to bring Naruto out of unconsciousness. However, all their efforts were in vain, so all they could do was wait, and that wasn't something Danzo liked very much. He couldn't steal chakra from the girl, even though she was a Jinchuriki with half the power of the Kyuubi. For some unknown reason, Natsumi had no chakra, which was illogical, although now that he thought about it, she had never shown any signs of the Ninetales' power since Naruto showed hints of it at the age of 3. For that reason, Danzo ordered that her chakra be drained, but Natsumi refused since the girl was useless to him. Danzo saw nothing important or interesting in her. She had no ability he could use, so that silly little girl was just a hindrance. She was the only thing he needed for his perfect weapon to be perfect, because thanks to that silly girl, Naruto hadn't killed all his emotion Somyon who would obey his orders and remain unmoved by anything, to create shinobi as killing machines. That was the reason Root was created. Therefore, he comes to believe that Natsumi is not actually a Jinchuriki, just an ordinary human. And it's not as if he could ask or investigate the matter, since those who witnessed the sealing died and Hiruzen arrived after he took them away. And adding to that the fact that no one knew about the birth of that girl, because no one knows the reason, and it's not as if he cared. But although he wouldn't admit it, he was curious, because when they checked the hex of the baby, the girl should have appeared too. But it didn't, and they assumed that Kushina was only going to have a baby, something extremely strange. He stopped dwelling on such a stupid topic and focused on a more important matter, the blonde boy in the infirmary. He wanted to know about his progress, but it was the same as a few months ago, nothing, no improvement, so he would take more drastic measures on both sides. He was going to reprimand his torturers for going too far and not controlling themselves since the boy was on his deathbed. As for the other option, he had to think it over, but the way things were going, he would have to bring that person in. She sighed in frustration before walking away from the room. In Naruto's subconscious. The blonde boy, after playing for a long time, grew tired for a reason he didn't know. He felt weak and his hands trembled like when he was hit and always fainted. He felt just like that, only he didn't feel any pain, so he closed his eyes before falling asleep, only the wind held him. Although she couldn't deny that she missed Kurama, she knew he was all right. After all, no one could hurt him, at least not directly. The blonde man felt at ease and was thus in total calm and serenity. For the first time, he was not beaten before sleeping. The blonde man did not want to wake up. He did not want to wake up in his reality. He knew that this was not real. He knew that it was false and that all of this was in his head, in his dreams. However, it was much better than his reality. I don't want to wake up anymore, the blonde man thought, before smiling and finally falling into a deep sleep. 6 hours later, the blonde boy stirred in his sleep and with his eyes closed flew through the white void. He flew for more than 5 minutes until he stopped and descended downwards. When he did, he extended his hands. From his palms came a red chakra forming enormous doors. When they were ready, Naruto pushed his palms as if pushing an invisible wall and the doors opened. Naruto walked, and the more he walked, the more the white color disappeared and he reached the familiar hallways that looked like a sewer. Naruto walked as if he were sleepwalking, crossed several corridors until he turned a corner and reached Kurama's gate. Upon hearing footsteps, Kurama approached the gate and peered through the bars and was surprised to see the blonde man standing with his eyes closed. Naruto, Kurama asked in surprise. Naruto walked silently through the gate and stood in front of Kurama. That's when Kurama noticed that Naruto was once again unaware of what he was doing. Kurama, Naruto whispered, but that didn't stop him from talking in his sleep. I don't want to wake up, I don't want to suffer, the blonde boy muttered. Kurama remained silent, staring at the blonde boy. He was extremely angry at the way they were treating him, but he felt so powerless because he couldn't do anything to stop it. The Nine Tails grabbed Naruto and put him on top of his head. Calm down, Naruto. Kurama said, I don't know how or when, but I know that one day you will get out of here and live happily, he said as he lay down so that Naruto would be more comfortable. Kurama, is it cowardly to want to die? Naruto asked with what little innocence he had left. Even if it's selfish for Natsumi, the blonde boy asked again as he lay down on the fox's soft fur. It's not cowardly, pup. Humans, like the tailed beasts, have their limits. You are your own limit and unfortunately you've already crossed it. Wanting to die isn't cowardly, it shows you're a brave person who endured more than you should have. Never forget that, pup. Answering your other question, I hope you remember what I'm about to tell you. Sometimes it's good to be selfish. Don't just focus on the happiness of others, but also on your own. Do you understand? Kurama said, looking seriously at Naruto. Yes, Kurama, the blonde boy said sleepily before falling asleep again. One of these days, all these humans will pay for what they've done. It might be late, but it will come, Kurama said angrily, clenching his jaw tightly. It's best if you don't wake up for a while to teach those idiots a lesson. And if you do wake up from your sleep, you'll still be here, so nothing will happen to you, Kurama thought with satisfaction. Chapter 4, Hibernation. There was a machine surrounding a large water pipe, inside which lay a small, completely naked body, its wounds visible and deep. A tube protruded from the mouth of the small blonde boy so he could breathe as his body floated in the water. Outside the door were Anbu, completely loyal to Danzo, who were especially watching that room. The only one in that room besides the blonde man was a pale, dark-haired man. The subject was reviewing something in his notes about some theories to be able to awaken the Jinchuriki from his hibernation, as he preferred to call it, much for his amusement. Danzo called him and asked him as a favor to come and check on him, but in reality he bribed him, saying that if he didn't come to check on the blonde man, he would tell the truth about the experiments he was carrying out behind the village's back. But the reality that he agreed to come here anyway was because of the blonde Jinchuriki, since he was going to do one of his best experiments. That was the agreement they made when he set the condition, and that was that he was going to experiment on him. It was as if he had already beaten Danzo, since on the one hand he could bribe him with this later if he discovered some interesting things about the blonde boy, and on the other hand he could advance further in his experiments, perhaps some theories. He just hoped that the boy would withstand the experiments, and if he didn't it would be a shame since the boy really seemed like someone interesting. Kyukuku, how intriguing, maybe I'll find out who you are later, but now I have to wake you up, said the dark-haired man as he began to write some things down. It was then that the pale, dark-haired man heard footsteps echoing in the place, resonating through the dark and little-used corridor. Gradually, a shadow emerged, the dim light revealing a silhouette that walked briskly. The figure had bandages covering half of his face, carried a cane, and wore a cold expression that betrayed no emotion. Why the rush, Danzo? He asked in a mocking tone, still without taking his eyes off his notes. In contrast, the subject identified as Danzo remained silent, completely ignoring the mocking comment of the person accompanying him. You're worried about him, aren't you, Danzo? He asked again with a mocking smile. Kyukuku, who would have thought Danzo worried about the Jinchuriki? After all, he's a good specimen worth experimenting on, he remarked again, licking his lips with his long tongue. Stop talking nonsense, Orochimaru, Danzo said, glaring at the man. Did I hit a nerve? He asked mockingly, "Do you have any progress?" Danzo asked, completely ignoring Orochimaru's question. "Maybe I can wake him up, I think he's in hibernation," said Orochimaru, staring intently at Danzo. "In hibernation?" Danzo asked, not understanding the word. "He is in a self-induced state, or is the nine-tailed fox cue by keeping the blonde unconscious?" Orochimaru said, looking at the blonde. "So how can we wake him up?" asked Danzo. "For now I can do some things, although I don't think it will take me long," Orochimaru said thoughtfully. Danzo asked nothing more and simply withdrew without saying a word. Orochimaru looked at the blonde boy with a smile as he thought about the future plans he would have for him. "Once you wake up, I'll try a few experiments on you. But for now, the most appropriate thing would be to wake you directly from the pentagram of the seal." He thought as a few ideas came to him. In one of the other cells, in one specific cell, and why was it so? That's easy. The other cells were a deep, coal-black color, rusted but still bearable, and the only way to open them was with a key. The security was rather stupid, however they were constantly guarded by Anbu, who were extremely strong, easily reaching Jounin rank. But on the other hand, there was one particular cell that was gold-colored. The bars were strong and very hard. To open the cell, a seal was needed, and not just any seal. It was a high-ranking seal with a long sequence that required good chakra control as well as a large amount of chakra. And another thing that differentiated it from the inside of the cells was that this one was a little more decent. It had a futon in good condition of an opaque gray color along with a wooden chair in the corner, and in the center there was a lamp that gave off very little light, but that was already something. The lamp illuminated the cell, revealing a small girl with slightly tanned skin. She was exotic, or so the Anbu passing by thought, and this was further emphasized by the 3 marks on each cheek that made her look even more exotic. Her eyes were a bit unusual. They were a blue color that surrounded the iris, and where the blue ended there was a blend of purple. She had a small, upturned nose, rosy cheeks, and full pink lips. Her head was round, like Kushina's, and her long hair easily trailed on the floor. The top of her hair was styled in long spikes, the middle was curly, and the ends were straight and thick. Her hair was blonde with red tips. If the sun shone, she would easily appear redheaded. Her hair easily covered her eyes. She was wearing a white dress. Although it was a little dirty and worn, it was still decent. The dress was loose and flowing. In the area where her breasts were not fully developed, it was a little tight at the waist and loose from there down. Despite all those luxuries that the other children didn't have, it couldn't be said that the little girl had everything she needed to survive. Frankly, that wasn't the case, and that didn't mean she was treated well either. They didn't beat her, that was true. However, she had chains around her small hands. They were made of steel, like a protective covering that completely encased her hands like a glove, a shell. Beyond that, the chains were long, although she couldn't go very far because of the chains on her feet. Other than that, she was fine. She had woken up not long ago and was very sad because she hadn't been able to see her older brother. He always visits her twice a month, but now he hadn't returned. She desperately wanted to see her brother, to be able to hug him and feel his warmth next to her as they slept together. When she was afraid because of the screams of children being brutally beaten, her brother would always hold her tightly, lovingly, and whisper soothing words while tenderly kissing her forehead. But that was no longer possible. Now who would tell her everything will be all right and hold her until she fell asleep? Perhaps it wasn't very often that he was here, but even though she only saw him a few days a week, it was more than enough for her to remember the same feeling of being protected and safe until he came back so she could feel it again. You could say she was used to him coming every 2 times a month. I missed him so. Nia-sanch whispered, hoping he would come, but he didn't. He expected her to come and say, "I missed you, Databeo," and then she would reply, "Me too, Databane." It was like a custom between siblings. That was undoubtedly what he missed the most. "I hope you're okay, Databane, and that nothing bad happens to you," she thought with tears in her eyes. "I love you, Naruto Nia-san," she said, hugging her knees and burying her face in them, letting the tears flow freely down her face. "With Naruto." The blonde man opened his eyes suddenly and looked around the place. He was a little scared. He didn't understand where he was. He tried to focus more on his surroundings, but all he could see was blurry. He was tired and hungry and felt incredibly weak. It was like when he was beaten up, so it wasn't a very pleasant feeling. "I try to remember how I ended up here, however my only memory was being in the cell, and after that everything went black." It was after a few minutes that his vision cleared a little, allowing him to see that he was in a thick tube. There wasn't much space there, but enough to float. Naruto tried to speak, but small, transparent, round things came out of his mouth, not from his mouth, but from a mask covering his nose and mouth. Each time he breathed, these round things emerged. The blonde boy reached for the mask, trying to remove it, but a voice stopped him. "Stop it, Naruto, that thing helps you breathe. If you take it off, you'll drown." Kurama scolded him. "Drown, what's that?" The blonde boy asked innocently. The fox sneered, but at the same time he felt sorry for the child. "Listen, Naruto, I'll explain that to you later. Now do you remember what happened when you were unconscious?" Kurama asked. "No, Kurama, I don't remember anything. What happened?" The blonde boy asked curiously. Forget it for now, it's not important, she said resignedly. Since the blonde man still seemed to remember nothing, she made a mental note to talk to him later. So where are we? Said Naruto as he placed his hands on the cold glass. I don't know, but this liquid isn't water, or at least not entirely, Kurama said as he looked around the place intently. Just as Naruto was about to say something, he saw someone approaching, so he moved away from him, or at least away from the person's proximity. Thanks to the water, he couldn't see very well, but when the person came into view, he saw a completely pale man with a strange mark between his nose and under his eyes that was somewhere between blue and perhaps green. His eyes were dark and elongated, his hair reached halfway down his back and was black. He wore a long-sleeved black shirt along with a military green vest, simple black pants, and blue shinobi sandals. On the seal, Kurama looked at the man in surprise. He didn't quite recognize him, but he'd seen him a few times when Kushina was with Minato. Since Giorgio was Minato's sensei, it was logical that his team would be close to him, or at least that was before Tsunade left the village after losing her younger brother. He knew that boy had aspired to be Hokage, but he died in one of the many wars Konoha had fought in. He knew this because Kushina held the woman in high esteem and had been by her side. They saw each other as mother and daughter. But the redhead couldn't offer much support to the Sannin since she was sent on missions very often. However, what Kurama knew was the final straw was when, some time later, she fell in love with a man who shared the same dream as her deceased brother, a truly ironic situation, since Tsunade's suitor had also died. This prompted the Sannin to leave Konoha, and not only her but also Giorgio to complete his investigation into a spy network. But even so, he came to Konoha from time to time. His last visit, as far as he could remember, was when Minato and Kushina told him they wanted him to be the godparents of the baby Kushina was carrying. The dark-haired man stayed in Konoha, though even though that man reminded him a little of the Uchiha clan, he always distrusted the pale man. If he remembered correctly, that man's name was Orochimaru. If that guy is working with Danzo, it means he's a traitor. I knew I never liked that guy, he gave me a bad feeling, Kurama thought angrily. Although I don't understand how the third Hokage hasn't noticed the snake living among them. There's no doubt Konoha is infested with nothing but traitors, he grumbled. Outside the seal, Naruto looked curiously at the subject who was now licking his lips while looking at him as if he were a predator and the blonde was the prey. It was extremely terrifying for the little blonde boy. Naruto, be careful of that guy, he's very strong, even stronger than Danzo, Kurama warned him, which scared the blonde boy. Kyukuku, I finally managed to awaken you, Jinchuriki, Orochimaru said, laughing and staring maniacally at the blonde boy. At last I can test my experiments on a specimen as valuable as you, he added, leaning closer to get a better look at the blonde boy, who reminded him of a certain person with bright blonde hair and a red-headed partner. You're more interesting than I thought, little Namikaze, Orochimaru said. This caused the blonde man to open his eyes in surprise, as did Kurama, who only had one thought in his head. Oh shit. Chapter 5 Orochimaru. The small blonde boy with blue eyes sat on a simple white cot. This fellow, Orochimaru, or at least that's the name Kurama had given him, had placed him there, not before pulling him out of the water pipe. Afterward they gave him some clothes to change into so he wouldn't be naked. The young blonde Jinchuriki was now wearing short blue pants and a long-sleeved black shirt. He said he didn't care much about the person in the center of this place. It wasn't the first time Danzo had brought someone unknown, but it was the first time the blonde boy had found this person truly strange. However, it wasn't new for him to see strange people in this place. In fact, he remembered the last time when he was 3 years old. Two elderly people came in, an old woman and an old man with wrinkles on their faces and a hard, cold gaze. He was used to it, even though it was uncomfortable. However, Naruto knew that, despite Kurama's denials, he was just a weapon because of the way they treated him. They didn't even treat him like a person. They treated him like something old or broken, like throwing away a shuriken simply because it was rusty, or discarding a sword simply because it was broken or bent. That's what Naruto was. He wasn't considered someone, but rather something. Don't think about stupid things, Kurama scolded him. Naruto remained silent when he heard Kurama's words. I know it's wrong, but it's true, Databeo, and you know it, Naruto said with a bitter smile on his lips. Kurama wanted to say the opposite, but deep down he knew it was true. At the same time, he wanted to deny it, but that would only feed false fantasies. In reality, Kurama felt a connection with Naruto since both were being used as weapons in the war. The only difference between the weapons and him was that the weapons were inert, lifeless while he was alive. Although humans, except for Naruto, thought he had no feelings, they considered him a demon just like Naruto. And it wasn't just those similarities, both were imprisoned in a cell among many other things. Naruto was the only one who understood Kurama's pain. Anyway, Databeo, who is he? You only told me his name, said Naruto, wanting to know more about this guy than anything else as he aroused a certain curiosity in him. As I already told you, that guy is called Orochimaru, who is one of the three legendary seinen along with Tsunade and Jiraiya, he began to explain. Jiraiya, isn't he the guy you told me about? Dadabeo, Naruto asked. That's right, Jiraiya, your godfather was a very good friend of Orochimaru, but due to certain circumstances they all drifted apart, he said with boredom. And what are those circumstances? And what is a circumstance? Dadabeo, he said, a little embarrassed. Now all that's left is for him to ask where babies are born, he thought to himself with annoyance. Kurama began to explain to the blonde everything he knew about the three Sannin as well as answering his other question. Oh, I get it now, Dadabeo, so Orochimaru is a traitor to the village, said Naruto, but I don't understand how you know he's a traitor, he asked again. You do nothing but ask questions, Kurama said through gritted teeth, to which Naruto only smiled apologetically. Well, the third Hokage would never have approved of this, and besides, if Orochimaru has these kinds of deals with Danzo, it's because he has something to hide, and the other reason is that Orochimaru has the Jounin vest of Konoha. He finished explaining as briefly as he could. Oh, Dadabeo, so if he brought him here with me, then what does he want from me? Although I think that's a stupid question since all they want is power, our power, he said bitterly. Kurama didn't answer anymore, so Naruto focused on the person in front of him. In fact, he noticed that the guy was staring at him, but he didn't pay much attention to it. He was quite used to it. The blonde man hadn't taken his eyes off the wall for quite some time. It was the only way he could sometimes find relief when he wished the day would end or the pain would pass. He would simply think in a blank slate to make everything around him disappear. It was very useful, or at least it was for him. You don't talk much, do you? Orochimaru's voice came. Naruto momentarily disconnected from his technique, but still didn't answer. He saw no interest in speaking, nor any importance in listening to the words of this unknown person. Besides, he could be quite talkative about certain topics. That was true, even inquisitive, but only with a few people could count them on one hand. But with the people he didn't want to see that side of him, he simply showed the other someone different. Cold as ice, both physically, meaning his body temperature was accustomed to sub-zero degrees, and also in the way he behaved, since he didn't give importance to many things and responded very curtly or simply seriously. He was also quite observant, noticing some details, more specifically glancing sideways at Orochimaru, looking at several rather peculiar utensils with a strange shape, as well as the owner of those objects. He spent a long time like this with Orochimaru, murmuring things about his experiment. I told you, Kurama, everyone wants the same thing except this time I'm going to be the lab rat, Naruto said bitterly. It seems so, Kurama sighed, though he was a little worried about what that guy might do to Naruto. Orochimaru drew blood samples, but Naruto didn't resist whatever the man did to him. It was pointless anyway, he wouldn't gain anything. He'd just be beaten unconscious or chained all over his body, or just for fun poisoned him. Then they'd bet on how long it would take for him to lose consciousness, and whoever lost would punish him simply out of spite for losing money. He didn't really want to be tortured. After more than 2 hours, the man had finally finished taking samples, and to his great astonishment, he had put bandages around his back, wrists, and ankles, as well as applying medication and some ointments and creams for his wounds, which were beginning to leave marks. This had greatly disconcerted the blonde man since it was the first time anyone had bothered to examine him and treat his wounds, and if they did, it was always reluctantly, often resulting in 1 or 2 injuries in the process. Why are you doing this? Dadabeo, the blonde man asked, pointing to the bandages that now covered his stomach and back. The blonde man didn't want to ask, especially not to a guy whose intentions he didn't know, but damn it, his curiosity was piqued. He didn't think it was for anything good. After all, nobody does things or a favor without something in return, so he didn't think this was out of charity or kindness. Maybe he was being a little defensive, but could anyone blame him? He was used to being on the defensive all the time since he couldn't let his guard down unless he wanted to die. It was like committing suicide, only without a knife or jumping off a cliff. This place had raised him that way. It was like having eyes in the back of his head. It made you easily lose your sanity and become a little too paranoid. Orochimaru remained silent for a long time, still focused on writing down observations for his new experiment in his notebook. You must be in good condition to withstand the experiments. I don't need you to die, much less have Danzo around. Orochimaru was about to say something else, but he remained silent, lost in thought, knowing that Danzo would either betray him or seek revenge if he let that child die. It was quite obvious that the mummy cared about what happened to him for reasons he didn't understand, but he knew they weren't good intentions. That makes sense, Datebeo. I knew it wasn't for good intentions. He thought bitterly. How did you know he was Namikaze's son? Dadabeo, Naruto asked, remembering what he had called him. I don't need to be that smart to figure it out. If others don't realize it, it's because they're too ignorant and idiotic, Orochimaru said without any consideration in his voice. It sounds kind of like you would say Dadabeo, Naruto said mockingly. Shut up, don't compare me to that snake, Kurama said with disgust. Okay, that's fine, Databeo, said Naruto, not wanting to fight with Kurama, not now at least. Naruto was already back in his cell. The Orochimaru guy had already left and they had immediately locked him up again. He was currently leaning against the cell, pressing his pale skin against it, letting his thoughts wander. He didn't always do this, perhaps reflecting on his life, though he hadn't for some time, as it only made him sink deeper into darkness, leaving an emptiness in his heart. Unfortunately, that feeling was growing ever larger, more unbearable and agonizing. Perhaps it was the loneliness that was consuming him more and more. And all because now it was becoming increasingly unbearable, even though before all those feelings had been soothed by his younger sister. She was like a candle, a light in the darkness, the only ray of light that kept him sane, that made him believe that hope was still possible. She was the one who made him believe that there was something good in every person, despite what they wanted to show on the outside, or at least that's what she had said. And it all truly resonated with him, he felt it. Before, he cared less about his life, not that it made much difference now, but at least she made him feel alive despite everything. What would happen, what would change around him, she was the only one capable of ensuring that he wouldn't change completely, that the innocence he had lost was still there when he was with Natsumi. I really missed her a lot since I hadn't seen her for months. I hoped I could see her again in a few days. They would let me see her. Chapter 6, Visiting Day. Another dark day has passed for the little children, another day of survival. A small blonde boy was in the torture room as usual every morning. It was always like this after every training session, but not before they stole his chakra. The blonde man was sitting in the chair while in the back was an Anbu with a cat mask. The subject had his hand above the blonde man's head, applying slight pressure. "You are nobody, you are just something, you are just a weapon to use as we please," the man said in a calm and serious voice. "Do you understand?" he asked stoically. "Yes, Databeo," said Naruto, looking at the ground, seeing his reflection in the pool of blood. It was always like this for the poor blonde boy. Before, it was quite difficult for him to respond or accept what they did or said to him, but as time passed, they subjected him to painful mental torture, damaging and distorting his memories and even his own thoughts. Kurama unfortunately couldn't do anything, so he felt quite powerless watching the blonde boy suffer and be controlled because he doesn't even think for himself anymore. They're controlling him like a puppet they can manipulate at will. They even went so far as to control his emotions, suppressing them so he doesn't feel strong feelings. But they can't always do that because something still persists, something they haven't been able to suppress, the love he feels for his sister. Although Naruto doesn't know what love is and doesn't understand it, he thinks what he feels is the same as what he feels around him. This was sometimes a little frustrating and confusing, not being able to distinguish a feeling from an object or a person. The hours passed like this, the Anbu spouting false ideologies about the shinobi world and how it functioned, as if they were giving a history lesson but distorting it and adding some falsehoods, and Naruto just listened. After a while longer, the torture ended. Naruto was a little dazed. Although it was normal for him to be in that state after all, it was as if he'd been brainwashed, and it took a while to focus and put everything back together. Naruto was led to the cell. He stood there again with his gaze lost in nothingness. His body was there, but his mind was elsewhere. Sweat mingled with the blood that trickled from a large cut across his forehead and eyebrow, the blood dripping into his eye. Naruto hugged his legs, resting his chin on them. His small, aching body shuddered at the new, rigid, and uncomfortable position, rocking back and forth repeatedly. Shinobi are just weapons without feelings, killing in cold blood. That's the world of a shinobi, Naruto said in a small whisper, repeating the same thing over and over. This happened every time he was tortured because his brain did not recover from the memories and took a while to process them, especially the distorted memories, so that he would grasp them abruptly and suddenly, discarding the true ones as well as feelings that had just emerged or were just discovered, as well as thoughts of escaping or that he was not a demon. He was in shock. It took a while for him to stop rocking, but even so he was holding his knees while still burying his face in them. Sleepiness came over Naruto. He was very sleepy, but he knew that if he slept he wouldn't be able to visit Natsumi anymore, and that day would only be postponed. Besides, he insisted a lot that they let him see her. It was the only opportunity he had. He had already asked for permission long before they took him to the mental torture. They reluctantly accepted his request, of course, not before they beat him. Besides, it was a rule of Danzo to visit her every month, so there was no problem with that since he did not visit her for months. Naruto groaned under his breath thanks to the wounds that were now on his body. Although they weren't that painful after all, the worst would be the beatings. But after his normal routine, he was going to visit his sister since it had been months since he had seen her. He really missed her too much. Hours later, all her routine had ended, so it was time to visit her beloved sister. He crossed all the corridors along with an Anbu who accompanied him. The blonde looked at himself for a few seconds. He was a mess. That was nothing new, but he didn't need his sister to see him like that. Naruto created a bushin before. He was incapable of making one, but because he has a seal that Kurama helped him put on since he was 3 years old, it was a stored chakra where he had more than half of his chakra. Since when his and Kurama's chakra are taken away, he has very little left to make a bushin. Naruto created the bushin to hide his wounds and make his scars disappear. His clothes were in bad condition and torn. He even painted a carefree and happy smile on his face. He did it every time he visited her so she wouldn't get scared. It was an illusion and a disguise that he created himself. The Anbu performed a series of long and complicated hand seals until the sequence was complete and the golden cell opened. Naruto entered and the Anbu closed it again, this time with the blonde boy inside. When he saw that everything was in order, he withdrew. Natsumi lifted her face when she heard the cell open and saw her brother with a huge smile. The girl stood up with a bright smile as tears of happiness ran down her face. Na Naruto niasantartemudeo con sorpresa Natsumi. I missed you Dadabeo, said Naruto as he walked towards her. Natsumi smiled upon hearing those words she had so longed to hear. And I also di Dadabane, she said with a stutter very characteristic of the little girl. It was common for the little redhead to stutter since she had no contact with humans and therefore no conversations. She even said incomplete sentences because she didn't know how to pronounce them. They both looked at each other for a few seconds without saying or doing anything, until Natsumi ran and hugged Naruto with all her might, burying her small head in Naruto's firm chest, causing Naruto to put his chin on top of her head. The blonde was a head taller than Natsumi. The blonde man wrapped his arms around her fragile body, bringing her closer to him. Natsumi sighed with satisfaction at having her brother so close. She had truly missed him so much. She heard his heart beating a little faster, but it always felt like that whenever she hugged him. She also felt a small shiver. She never knew the reason for it, but assumed it was because he was happy to see her, something she should think about, and simply enjoyed the wonderful moment. They continued embracing without saying a word, simply enjoying each other's silence, savoring every moment they could spend together. The days always felt so short when they were apart for so long, but being far apart felt endless, and they longed for time to pass quickly so they could be together again. That's why they cherished those 2 days a month, or sometimes just one if they weren't so lucky, more than anything else, and treasured those moments together so much. Naruto pulled away slightly from Natsumi and cupped her cheeks in his hands. Natsumi just looked at him and smiled. Naruto leaned down and kissed her forehead tenderly. The redhead blushed, making her look absolutely adorable. That beautiful moment would have lasted longer if it hadn't been interrupted by a loud bang that was heard at the end of the hallway, along with the horrible screams of a child. They both separated and peered through the cell bars. Natsumi struggled a bit to get closer because of the chains attached to the wall, but she was still able to see what was happening outside. 3 Anbu had a child with brown skin and black hair held down. He was about 8 years old. Naruto had seen the boy a few times. He was brought there 6 months ago. Apparently the boy was an orphan. Natsumi let out a small squeal and clung tightly to Naruto, burying her face in his chest. They both knew what was going to happen and they didn't like it at all. No, please. A heart-wrenching scream was heard. That's when the sound of whipping was heard. Natsumi shuddered with fear and clung tighter to Naruto. Stop, please. Naruto grabbed Natsumi and took her to the back of the cell. She didn't need to see that. The cracking of the whips could be heard for an hour or more, during which both remained silent as Natsumi sobbed and clung tighter to the blonde boy. SHHH, calm down, Natsumi, said the blonde man, trying to get the little girl to stop crying. I moved her a little away from him before wiping the salty drops from her face. It was as if blood were coming from a wound, except she didn't have a wound and it wasn't red. They're called tears, Naruto, Kurama reminded him. I had forgotten Dadabeo. Naruto sat on the small bed in the room with little Natsumi on his lap. Naruto reached into his bag to grab some earplugs which he borrowed from an Anbu. He put earplugs in the redhead's mouth to block out the noise and waited patiently for her to calm down. I take Natsumi's face in my hands and gently wipe away the salty drops that were falling down her face. Yes, it always sounds. Very strong, Dadabane, Natsumi said, raising her voice. It's strong, not fat, Naruto corrected in a low voice even though he knew he wouldn't be heard. What did I say, Dadabane? And I know I'm hearing you, said the little redhead a little louder than before. You said, Naruto corrected again. WWHAT, he shouted, trying to get Naruto to speak louder. Forget it, Dadabeo, the blonde boy said, more to himself than to Natsumi. Huh, he shouted again. Naruto just shook his head, a large drop of sweat forming on his forehead, inside the seal. Kurama was lying between his front paws, watching the image of the blonde boy smiling next to Natsumi. It reminded him a little of Kushina and that idiot Namikaze. It was like seeing their spitting image reincarnated in those children, only with different personalities. Little Natsumi physically resembled Kushina, except for her hair color. Kushina's hair was blood red, while Natsumi's was blonde at the top, spiky like Minato's, and long, straight red at the ends, just like Kushina's. It was as if the two colors blended together like a wash. She was temperamental and a bit moody, easily angered and prone to losing control of her emotions. At the same time, she was a sweet, patient, and shy child who even had difficulty speaking. When she made eye contact, she would often lower her head when embarrassed, which Kurama found amusing. It was as if she were Kushina's complete opposite. And Naruto was strange. There was no other word to describe the blonde boy. Because physically, though he hated to admit it, he looked a lot like Minato. In fact, he was like his spitting image, except for the round face he'd inherited from Kushina, which was the only physical similarity they shared. In terms of personality, he was quite cold, quiet, and distant, but at the same time he was humble with a good heart, yet also possessing a temper as explosive as Kushina's when she got angry. However, he didn't usually unleash that side of himself so easily since his emotions were controlled, which was a bit confusing for the poor blonde boy. Kurama smiled when he saw the two children shouting at each other, before simply lying down on the bed and enjoying the 2 full days they had left together, or less if they weren't strict about visits to Natsumi. Kurama knew the real reason why the redhead hadn't received the same treatment as Naruto. It was easy for him to see, since the children who were being held prisoner didn't have a bed, a lamp, decent clothes, or food 3 times a day for a whole week. No, they didn't have any of that. She didn't know the pain of beatings or mistreatment by the Anbu, the physical torture, much less the mental torture, nor the horrible emptiness they felt in their stomachs every time they went to sleep without a bite to eat, lying on the cold floor. The reason was that everyone thought Naruto was the only Jinchuriki because he was the one who possessed the power of the 9 tails, and that Natsumi was just an ordinary girl, the daughter of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, the only daughter of the 4th Hokage. That's why they didn't take it out on her, since she wasn't a vessel for demons. Therefore, Naruto wasn't the 4th Hokage's son, he wasn't human, he was anything, because they thought Naruto wasn't the 4th Hokage's son, and that his resemblance to him was just a mockery of their savior since he was his reincarnation, the evil of the Kyuubi. And they weren't going to show any consideration for the person, not the demon who killed their loved ones.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.